Grief is a strange, disorienting country. It has its own geography, its own climate. For the past week, I had been living there, a permanent resident in the land of loss. The air was thin, the colors were muted, and a perpetual, chilling wind seemed to blow right through my soul. Today, that wind was real. It bit at the edges of my black veil, and the heavy wool of my coat felt like sandpaper against skin made too sensitive by sorrow. We were gathered at the graveside, a small, somber flock of black-clad figures huddled against the gray November sky. Before us was the polished mahogany casket, and inside, supposedly, was my husband of 40 years, my Richard. If you are listening to this and have ever felt the ground give way beneath your feet, please subscribe and share your story. This is a tale about a day when the ground didn't just give way, it split open, revealing a dark, terrifying abyss I never knew existed. And it all started with a vibration in my pocket. Richard Vance was not a quiet man. He was a force of nature, a titan of industry with a laugh that could shake a room and a mind that moved at the speed of light. To see him reduced to a name etched on a brass plaque felt like a violation of the natural order of the universe. The official story was a boating accident, a sudden squall on the lake, a capsized vessel. His body, they said, had been recovered 2 days later, damaged by the rocks and the water. It was his business partner, Marcus Thorne, who had explained it all to me, his handsome face a mask of practiced grief. "Eleanor, my dear," he had said, his voice a low, comforting rumble as he held my hands in his. "It's a terrible, terrible tragedy. The damage, it's severe. The coroner and I, we both agree. A closed casket is the kindest thing, for everyone, to remember him as he was." I had agreed, numb and lost in the fog of shock. But even then, a small, dissonant voice in the back of my mind had whispered that it was wrong. Richard was a proud man. He faced the world head-on. He would have wanted people to see him, to face his mortality with the same unflinching courage he had faced every business deal and every challenge. A closed casket felt clandestine. It felt like a secret. Now, standing at the edge of the abyss, that feeling was stronger than ever. My son, Julian, stood beside me, his face pale and drawn. He held my arm, but his grip was loose, distracted. His gaze kept flicking to Marcus, who stood on the other side of the grave, the perfect picture of the grieving, steadfast friend, ready to deliver the final eulogy. Julian had always looked up to Marcus, his Uncle Marcus, the charming, charismatic partner who had helped his father build an empire. In this new, terrifying world without Richard, Julian was already leaning on him as a pillar of strength. Marcus began to speak. His voice, rich and resonant, rolled across the silent cemetery. He spoke of Richard's brilliance, his vision, his loyalty. He told stories of their early days, of battles won in boardrooms and deals sealed with a handshake. It was a beautiful speech. Perfect. Almost too perfect. It was a performance, delivered with the flawless precision of a man who knew his lines by heart. And that's when my phone vibrated. It was in the pocket of my coat, a low, insistent buzz against my hip. My first reaction was a flash of irritation. Who would be so thoughtless as to text me now? In the middle of my husband's funeral? I subtly shifted, trying to ignore it, but it buzzed again. With my head bowed, pretending to be lost in prayer, I discreetly slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled out the phone. I glanced at the screen, my eyes blurry with unshed tears, fully expecting to see a well-meaning but ill-timed message of condolence. But what I saw made the air freeze in my lungs. The screen was lit up with a new message, but it was the name of the sender that made my world tilt on its axis. It was a name I never expected to see on my screen again. Richard. For a heartbeat, my mind refused to process it. It was a glitch, a cruel, technological ghost, a saved message from the past, somehow resending itself. I almost turned it off, my fingers trembling, but my thumb, acting of its own accord, slid across the screen and opened the message. It contained 4 words that defied logic, that defied reason, that defied the very mahogany casket in front of me. "I am still alive." The world went silent. Marcus's eloquent voice faded into a meaningless hum. The cold wind disappeared. All I could feel was the frantic, panicked drumming of my own heart. This had to be a prank. A sick, twisted, monstrous joke. Who would do such a thing? My thumb hovered over the screen, shaking so badly I could barely control it. I was about to type a furious, grief-stricken reply when the screen lit up again. A new message from Richard. This one was longer. Don't let them close the casket. The body isn't mine. Trust no one. Especially Marcus. Time stopped. Marcus, the man who was at that very moment delivering a tearful tribute to his fallen friend. The man who had insisted on the closed casket. The man my son was looking at with such trust and admiration. A cold, terrifying clarity cut through the fog of my grief. This wasn't a prank. The specificity of the message, the warning. It was a puzzle piece, and it slammed into place with the horrifying logic of a nightmare. The closed casket wasn't an act of kindness. It was an act of concealment. And so we say goodbye to a giant. Marcus's voice boomed, suddenly crashing back into my awareness. He was reaching the end of his speech. A friend, a husband, a father, may he rest in peace. The finality in his voice was a death knell. I looked up. The cemetery workers were shuffling, preparing the ropes and pulleys. The minister was opening his book to say the final prayers of committal. They were going to lower him. They were going to bury a stranger in my husband's grave. My mind was screaming, "Do something, stop them." But what could I do? Scream that my dead husband had just texted me? They would think I'd gone mad. Julian would be mortified. Marcus would look at me with that practiced, pitying concern and have me sedated. It was the perfect trap. "Let us pray," the minister said. Heads bowed around me. It was now or never. I looked at the phone one last time. Trust no one. Richard's words. He had known I would be alone in this. He was counting on me. The anger I had felt in the moments after reading the text surged through me again. A hot, protective fire that burned away all fear, all hesitation. They were not going to bury my husband's name. They were not going to get away with this. As the first handful of dirt was about to be tossed onto the casket, I did the only thing I could. I screamed. It wasn't a ladylike cry of grief. It was a raw, piercing, and utterly shocking sound that ripped through the solemn silence. No. Every head snapped up. Every eye was on me. Before anyone could react, I broke away from Julian's weak grasp and ran. I ran the few steps to the grave and threw myself in front of the casket, my hands spread wide as if to protect it. "Stop!" I cried out, my voice trembling but loud. "Don't you dare! You can't bury him!" The world stared back at me in stunned silence. The minister's mouth hung open. The workers froze, their shovels in mid-air. And I saw the expressions on the faces of the two men who mattered most. My son Julian's face was a mask of pure, horrified embarrassment. And Marcus Thorne, for a single, fleeting second, before he composed his features back into a mask of deep concern, for just 1 second, I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated fury in his eyes. And in that moment, I knew. The text was real. My husband was alive, and I had just declared war on the man who was trying to bury him. The aftermath of my outburst was a blur of controlled chaos. The funeral was, of course, brought to an abrupt and undignified end. My hysterical episode, as I later heard it described, was the only thing anyone could talk about. I was swiftly and firmly escorted back to the waiting limousine, my son on one side, Marcus on the other. Their grips were not gentle. They were the grips of handlers, not loved ones. "Mother, what on earth were you thinking?" Julian hissed, his face flushed with a shame that was almost palpable. "You embarrassed the entire family. People are saying you've lost your mind." "She hasn't lost her mind, Julian," Marcus said, his voice a smooth, calming balm that I now recognized as pure venom. "She's grieving. It's an unimaginable loss. It can manifest in extreme ways." He squeezed my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look like comfort but felt like a threat. "We'll get you home, Eleanor. You just need to rest." Rest. It was the last thing on my mind. My brain was on fire, every synapse crackling with a terrifying new energy. They sat on either side of me in the back of the car, A son who thought I was mad, and a man who knew I wasn't. It was the longest, most suffocating car ride of my life. I clutched my phone in my pocket, the cool, hard rectangle, a secret talisman, the only solid thing in a world that had turned to smoke and mirrors. Trust no one. Richard's words were a mantra, a lifeline. When we arrived back at my home, our home, Richard's and mine, a sprawling stone house that now felt less like a sanctuary and more like a beautifully decorated cage, they led me inside. Marcus immediately took charge, his authority absolute. He spoke to my housekeeper in low, serious tones. He called my doctor and described my breakdown in vivid, exaggerated detail. He was building a narrative, brick by careful brick. Eleanor Vance, the poor, grief-stricken widow, has become unhinged. She is not to be trusted. Her words are the product of a broken mind. "I'll have a nurse sent over," he said to Julian, loud enough for me to hear from the living room. "Someone to stay with her for a few days. Make sure she takes her medication." A chill ran down my spine. A nurse, a stranger in my house, a spy. I had to get them out. Both of them. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I forced myself to look frail, confused. "You're so kind. And Julian, darling, I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. It was just a wave of grief. I think I just need to be alone, with my memories." It worked. My performance as the fragile widow was convincing enough. Julian looked relieved, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of grief and madness. Marcus looked at me with a long, analytical stare, searching for any sign of the defiant woman from the graveside. I held his gaze, my own eyes wide and watery, until he finally seemed satisfied. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. After they left, I waited exactly 3 minutes. Then I went to every door and locked it. I drew the heavy curtains in every room, plunging the house into a dim twilight gloom. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. "They are watching," the text had said. Who were they? How? I took out my phone. The screen was dark, no new messages. I typed a frantic, whispered reply. "Richard, where are you? Are you safe?" The 3 small dots appeared, indicating he was typing. My heart hammered against my ribs. But then, they disappeared. The reply never came. Either he couldn't answer, or he didn't dare. Panic began to set in. A cold, cloying tide. I was alone, a prisoner in my own home, with no one to trust, and a story that no one would ever believe. I had to find proof, something tangible. Something that would cut through the narrative of madness Marcus was weaving around me. The accident report. The thought came to me in a flash. Marcus had handled everything. He had identified the body. He had filed the paperwork. He had given me a neatly bound copy, which I had placed, unread, in the top drawer of Richard's desk in his home study. The study was Richard's sanctuary. It was the one room I had not been able to bring myself to enter since his death. Crossing the threshold now felt like a trespass. The air was thick with the scent of his old books, leather, and the faint, spicy aroma of the cigars he rarely smoked. My hands trembled as I opened the drawer. There it was. A pristine white folder with the county coroner's seal. I sat down in his large leather chair and began to read. Most of it was technical jargon, cold and impersonal. But then I got to the physical description. Height, 6'2". Weight, 190 pounds. Hair, brown divided by gray. It all matched. But then I saw it, a single, small detail. Scars and identifying marks. Appendix scar, right abdomen. Small crescent-shaped scar above left eyebrow. I stopped breathing. The man in this report had an appendix scar. My Richard had never had his appendix out. He had told me the story a dozen times, how he was the only one of his 4 brothers who had never had the surgery. And the scar above his eyebrow. Richard's scar was above his right eyebrow, a faint white line from a childhood fall, not his left. It was wrong. The body in the morgue, the body in that casket, was not my husband. My relief was so profound it was dizzying, but it was immediately replaced by a chilling new question. If that wasn't Richard, then who was it? And where was my husband? Just then, my phone buzzed. A new message. From Richard. It was a single word. Bluebird. Bluebird? What did that mean? Was it a code? A place? A person? My mind raced, sifting through 40 years of memories. Bluebird. Bluebird. And then, it came to me. It wasn't a place. It was a thing. Years ago, for our 30th anniversary, Richard had bought a small, struggling tech company as a gift for me. A little startup specializing in data security. He thought it was a charmingly romantic gesture. I had thought it was a terribly impractical one. He had nicknamed the project Operation Bluebird. I hadn't thought about it in years. I had assumed he'd sold it or folded it into his main company, Vance Industries. I rushed to my laptop and typed Bluebird Data Security into the search bar. It was still active. A small, boutique firm operating out of a discreet office building downtown. The CEO was listed as a man I'd never heard of, but I knew with absolute certainty this was Richard's message. He wanted me to go there. But how? Marcus was having me watched. The nurse could arrive at any moment. I looked around the study, at the heavy curtains I had drawn. The feeling of being watched wasn't just paranoia. It was real. I scanned the walls, the ceiling, my eyes searching for something. And then I saw it. Tucked into the corner of the ceiling, partially hidden by the crown molding, was a tiny black dot, no bigger than a pinhead. A camera. My blood turned to ice. They had bugged Richard's study. They had been watching, listening, the entire time. They knew I had found the report. They knew I had seen the discrepancies. My phone buzzed again, another single word from Richard. Now. He knew they were on to me. He knew I had to move immediately. The panic was back, hot and sharp. I was trapped. The nurse would be here soon. Marcus would be alerted. What could I do? I looked at the camera, and then at the heavy, ornate fireplace that dominated one wall of the study. An idea, a desperate, reckless gamble, began to form in my mind. Richard was a brilliant strategist, but I was his wife, and in 40 years of marriage, I had learned a thing or two about creating a diversion. I took the coroner's report and walked over to the fireplace. With trembling hands, I lit a match and set a corner of the folder on fire. As the flames licked at the paper, I began to shout, "Lies! It's all lies!" I screamed at the empty room, at the hidden camera. "I won't let you do this! I won't be a part of it!" I let the burning folder drop into the fireplace. Then I grabbed a heavy brass poker and swung it wildly, smashing a large, ornate vase that stood on the mantelpiece. It shattered on the hearth, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent house. I let out a loud, theatrical sob, a performance of madness for my unseen audience. Let them think I had finally snapped. Let them think the grieving widow had destroyed the only proof she had in a fit of insanity. Let them focus on the fire, on the mess. Because while they were watching the show, I was already moving. I slipped out the side door of the study, into the hallway, and ran, my stockinged feet silent on the thick carpets of the house I no longer recognized as my own. There is an invisibility that comes with age. It's a strange, double-edged sword. People look at a woman with gray hair and a sensible coat, and their eyes slide right past you. They see a grandmother, a harmless retiree, not a threat. They don't see the fire in your mind or the desperate, calculated plan unfolding behind your calm facade. That night, I used that invisibility as a weapon and a shield. After creating the chaotic scene in the study, I didn't run for the front door. That's what they would expect. Instead, I went to the one place in the house that was truly mine, my gardening room. It was a small, glass-walled conservatory at the back of the house, filled with the earthy smell of potting soil and the quiet, green life of my orchids. It had a small, private door that led out to the far end of the gardens, a door that no one but me and the gardener ever used. I grabbed my sturdiest pair of gardening shoes, a dark woolen shawl, and the spare car key I kept hidden in a ceramic pot. I left my purse, my credit cards, my entire identity as Eleanor Vance, sitting on the kitchen table. The woman who fled into the cold November night was someone else entirely, a nameless, desperate woman with a single, burning objective. Driving through the city, I checked my rearview mirror every 10 seconds. Every pair of headlights felt like a pair of eyes, Every car that stayed behind me for more than 2 blocks felt like a tale. Was the paranoia real, or was it a symptom of the madness they wanted me to believe I had? It didn't matter. I had to act as if every threat was real. The Bluebird Data Security Office was located in a tall, anonymous glass building in a quieter part of the financial district. It was nearly 10 o'clock at night, and the building was mostly dark, a silent monolith against the glowing city skyline. I parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, my shawl pulled tight around me, my face hidden in the shadows. This was the first moment I truly allowed myself to question what I was doing. What if Bluebird wasn't what I thought? What if this was all a wild goose chase, a product of my grief-addled mind interpreting a random spam text? For a terrifying second, I saw myself as Marcus and Julian saw me, a confused old woman, lost and raving in the dark. Then, I felt the cool, hard shape of my phone in my pocket. I am still alive. It was real. Richard was real, and he was counting on me. I walked into the building's sterile marble lobby. A single, bored-looking security guard sat behind a large desk, watching a game on a small tablet. He looked up as I approached, his expression weary. "Building's closed for the night, ma'am," he said, not unkindly. "I know," I said, my voice soft. I was no longer the defiant woman who had screamed at a funeral. I was a lost, slightly confused grandmother again. It was a role I knew how to play. "It's just, my husband, Richard Vance, he works with the Bluebird Company on the 14th floor. He left his briefcase in the office, and his heart medication is inside. I know it's a terrible imposition, but could you possibly let me up for just a moment?" The guard's expression softened with a flicker of sympathy. He saw what I wanted him to see. "Vance, I don't know that name. The Bluebird office is usually empty by 5. "Oh, he works with them as a consultant." I improvised, my mind racing. "He comes and goes at odd hours. Please. His medication?" He hesitated, then sighed. "All right, look, I'll take you up. But you've got 2 minutes. That's it." As we rode up in the silent, sterile elevator, my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. What was I looking for? Richard hadn't given me any other clues. I was walking in blind. When the elevator doors opened onto the 14th floor, it was dark and silent. The guard swiped a master key card, and the glass doors to the Bluebird office suite clicked open. 2 minutes, he repeated, pointing a thumb back towards the elevator. I stepped inside. The office was small, modern, and impersonal. A few desks, some computers, a generic piece of abstract art on the wall. It looked like 1,000 other small businesses. There was no sign of Richard, no clue, nothing that felt like him. My hope began to plummet. Had I been wrong? I walked over to the CEO's desk, the one listed under a name I didn't recognize. It was clean, sterile, nothing. I looked around the room, a desperate, frantic energy rising in me. My 2 minutes were almost up. And then I saw it. It wasn't on a desk or a computer. It was on the wall, the generic, abstract painting. It was a swirl of blues and yellows, utterly forgettable. But Richard and I had a private joke. For 40 years, whenever we were in a hotel or an office with bland corporate art, he would whisper to me, "The key is always in the art, Ellie. You just have to know how to look." Ellie. My eyes scanned the painting. It looked like nothing. But then I looked at the frame. It was a simple, black metal frame. But in the bottom right corner, there was a tiny, almost invisible imperfection, a slight bulge in the metal. My fingers, shaking, traced the outline of the frame. I pressed on the bulge. There was a faint click, and a tiny, hair-thin panel popped open. It wasn't part of the frame. It was a hidden compartment, and inside, nestled in a small cutout, was a single, small, silver key. A key to a safe deposit box. Triumph, pure and electric, shot through me. I had it. This was real. I wasn't crazy. I slipped the key into my pocket, just as the lights in the office suddenly flickered on. I spun around. The security guard was standing in the doorway, but he wasn't alone. A second man stood beside him, a large, broad-shouldered figure in a dark suit. The guard was no longer looking at me with sympathy. He was looking at me with cold, hard fear. He hadn't brought me here out of kindness. He had been ordered to. "I'm afraid your 2 minutes are up, Mrs. Vance," the second man said. His voice was flat, empty of emotion. He took a step into the room. He wasn't a security guard. He worked for Marcus. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a goose chase. It was a trap. Marcus knew about Bluebird. He had anticipated I might come here. He had people waiting. My mind raced, frantically searching for an escape. The elevator was behind them. The windows didn't open. I was cornered on the 14th floor. I looked at the two men, and then I looked around the small office. My eyes landed on the fire alarm, a small red box on the wall near the door. I did the only thing I could. I feigned a dizzy spell. "Oh my," I gasped, pressing a hand to my forehead. "I feel quite faint. All the stress." I stumbled sideways, as if losing my balance, my movement clumsy and weak, the perfect picture of a frail, elderly woman. I stumbled right towards the wall. The large man took a step towards me, his hand reaching out to grab my arm. "We can help you with that, ma'am." But I was faster than he thought. In one swift movement, I leaned all my weight against the wall and pulled the fire alarm. The effect was instantaneous. A deafening, piercing klaxon began to scream through the building. Red lights flashed. It was chaos. The two men were momentarily stunned by the sheer volume of the alarm. That was all the time I needed. As they turned their heads towards the screaming alarm, I didn't run for the elevator. I ran in the opposite direction, towards the back of the office. There was a door there marked stairs. I wrenched it open and plunged into the darkness of the concrete stairwell, the sound of the alarm echoing around me like the screams of the damned. I could hear them shouting behind me, their footsteps pounding as they started to give chase. I ran down those stairs, flight after flight, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I was no longer an elegant widow. I was prey, fleeing for my life. But as I ran, I clutched the small silver key in my pocket. It was no longer just a key. It was proof. It was hope. I had walked into their trap, and I had escaped. And now, I knew with absolute certainty, this was not a game. And if I wanted to save my husband and myself, I had to stop playing defense. It was time to start fighting back. I emerged from the stairwell into a chaotic back alley, gasping for the cold night air. The sound of the fire alarm was still ringing in my ears, a phantom scream. I didn't look back. I melted into the shadows of the city, my heart a wild, frantic bird in my chest. For the next hour, I was a ghost. I took 2 different taxis, paying in cash from the small emergency fund I kept in my coat pocket, and had them drop me off blocks away from my destination. Walking the final distance through winding residential streets, every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every passing car a potential enemy. I couldn't go home. My house was compromised, a gilded cage under the watchful eye of Marcus. There was only one other place I could go, one person I had to face. The person whose trust I needed most, and whose belief would be the hardest to win. Julian's apartment was a sleek, modern condo in a high-rise building that overlooked the river. It was a place that felt more like a showroom than a home, all glass and steel and minimalist furniture. It was Vanessa's taste, not his. When I buzzed his intercom, my face hidden from the security camera, I simply said, "It's your mother. Let me in, now." The silence on the other end was a heavy, loaded thing. I could picture him, torn between his wife's warnings and the sheer, raw urgency in my voice. Finally, the lock buzzed, granting me entry. He was waiting for me at his apartment door, his face a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, worry, and a deep, weary frustration. "Mother, what is this? It's 2 a.m. I've been calling you for hours. Marcus said you had some sort of episode, that you set a fire in the study and ran away. He has people out looking for you. He's worried sick." "He is not worried, Julian," I said, my voice low and intense as I pushed past him into the apartment. "He is hunting." "What are you talking about?" he demanded, closing the door behind me. "This has to stop. You're not well. You're talking in riddles. You're making scenes. You're buying into these paranoid fantasies. Dad is gone. You have to accept that." I turned to face him. The vast, impersonal living room, a sterile backdrop for the most important conversation of my life. "He is not gone, Julian. I told you, he is alive, and Marcus is behind all of it. Based on what? He shot back, his voice rising. Based on a text message you think you got? A message you won't even show me? Mother, grief does strange things to the mind. It was not grief. I took a step towards him, my eyes boring into his. It was a warning, and I have proof. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small silver key. I held it out on the palm of my hand. It looked small and insignificant under the cold, recessed lighting of his apartment. "What is that?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "A key?" "It was hidden in a secret compartment in a painting at Bluebird Data Security," I said, speaking quickly, laying out the facts before he could dismiss them. "Your father sent me there. Marcus knew he might. He had men waiting for me. I was trapped on the 14th floor, Julian. I had to pull the fire alarm to escape." He stared at me, then at the key, and then back at me. I could see the battle raging in his mind. The son who loved his mother versus the practical, logical businessman who trusted his mentor. You set off the fire alarm at the Bluebird building tonight?" he asked, a note of dawning horror in his voice. "That was you? It's all over the internal security memos. They're saying it was a random act of vandalism." "It was not random," I insisted, my voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "It was survival. Why would Marcus have men waiting for me at a tiny, irrelevant subsidiary company, Julian? Why would he bug your father's study? Why would he insist on a closed casket for a man whose body report lists scars your father never had?" I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Doubt. The first crack in the wall of certainty Marcus had built around him. What are you talking about? Scars?" "The coroner's report, the one Marcus so helpfully provided. It lists an appendix scar. Your father never had his appendix out. You know that. We celebrated his 40th birthday by joking that he was the only Vance male to make it that far with all his original parts. The memory, so specific and true, hit him. I saw it land. His confident, dismissive posture began to crumble. He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze darting around the room as if the walls themselves were closing in. "This is insane," he whispered, but the conviction was gone. It was no longer a statement, it was a plea. He wanted it to be insane, because the alternative was too monstrous to contemplate. "The only thing that is insane," I said, pressing my advantage, my voice soft but unyielding, "is to believe that the man who loved you more than life itself, the man who taught you how to think, how to analyze, how to see through a bluff, would be buried without his son even questioning the details. Your father is alive, and he is in terrible danger. And Marcus Thorne, the man you have trusted your entire life, is the one who put him there. I cannot do this alone anymore, Julian. I need your help. Your father needs your help. Are you your father's son, or are you Marcus's puppet?" The final question hung in the air between us, sharp and unavoidable. He looked at me, his mother, his face streaked with exhaustion, his clothes rumpled from a midnight escape. And I saw the moment the scales finally tipped. He walked over to his laptop, his movements stiff and robotic. "The key," he said, his voice flat. "What's the number on it?" I read the small, etched number to him. He began typing, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed and confidence I had never seen in him. He was a different person now. He was Richard Vance's son. "It's a safe deposit box at a private vault downtown," he said after a moment, his eyes glued to the screen. "Rented under a shell corporation. A shell corporation I've never heard of, but the incorporation documents, they were filed by my father's personal security consultant, not the company lawyers." "Can you get us in?" I asked. "No," he said, his voice grim, "but I know what's inside. The access logs show it was last opened 2 days before the accident. And the inventory declaration lists one item, a hard drive. A full encrypted backup of my father's personal server." My breath caught. Richard's personal server. It was his real office, his brain. It contained everything, his private emails, his financial records, his secret projects. "But what does Marcus want?" I whispered. "The company. He was already a partner." Julian's face went pale. "Oh God," he breathed, as a new, horrifying realization dawned on him. The Prometheus Project. The what? It was Dad's big secret, A massive, high-risk investment in a new kind of energy source. He poured hundreds of millions into it. He believed it was the future of the company. But Marcus hated it. He thought it was too risky. They were fighting about it for months. He looked at me, his eyes wide with horror. Last month, the project had a catastrophic failure. A reactor test went wrong. The entire investment, it's gone. It's a complete write-off. It's enough to bankrupt the company, Mom. We're talking a black hole of debt. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together, forming a picture of pure, cold-blooded greed. So Marcus needed to hide it, I said, the words tasting like poison. He couldn't let the board find out he had championed a failed project that bankrupted them. Worse, Julian said, his voice barely a whisper. He needed a scapegoat, and a massive infusion of cash to cover the hole before anyone noticed. He began typing again. The company has a key man insurance policy on my father. A massive one. It pays out $500 million upon his death. There it was. The motive. It wasn't just about taking over the company. It was about survival. He had faked Richard's death, planned to bury an anonymous body, cash in the insurance, and pin the blame for the failed Prometheus project on the reckless decisions of his dead partner. It was a brilliant, monstrous, and almost perfect plan. We have to find him, I said, the urgency flooding back. Before Marcus does. My phone buzzed. A new message from Richard. It was a link. A single GPS coordinate. Julian pulled it up on his screen. It was a location just outside the city. An old, decommissioned lighthouse on the coast, one that Richard had bought years ago as a sentimental folly. He's there, Julian said. He's waiting for us. But as we stared at the map, a new message popped up on my phone. Not from Richard. It was a news alert from a local television station. The headline made my blood run cold. Breaking. Vance Industries CEO, Marcus Thorne, to hold emergency press conference tomorrow morning to address rumors about the company's financial stability and the tragic death of his partner, Richard Vance. It's the final move, Julian breathed. He's going to announce the Prometheus losses and blame Dad. He's going to use the press conference to cement the story and seize control. Once that happens, Dad's story becomes the ranting of a madman. Then we have to get to him first, I said, my voice hard as steel. We have to bring him to that press conference. The lines were drawn. The end game was here. It was no longer just about saving my husband. It was about saving his name. The drive out to the coast was a silent, high-stakes race against the dawn. Julian drove with a grim, focused intensity that reminded me so much of his father. I sat in the passenger seat, the city lights giving way to the dark, winding roads of the coastline. The GPS coordinate on my phone was a tiny, pulsing beacon of hope in the vast, oppressive darkness. We were no longer a grieving mother and a skeptical son. We were a rescue team. We were partners. The old lighthouse stood on a rocky promontory, a dark, lonely sentinel against the first pale gray light of dawn. It looked abandoned, desolate. But as we pulled up the gravel track, a small, hidden light flashed twice from one of the upper windows. The signal. He was here. He was alive. We found him in the lantern room at the very top of the lighthouse, surrounded by a bank of computers and communication equipment, a makeshift command center overlooking the churning gray sea. When I saw him, my heart stopped. He was thinner, his face etched with lines of exhaustion and stress, and his arm was in a sling. But it was him. It was my Richard. He stood up as I entered, and his tired face broke into a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. "Eleanor," he breathed. I didn't say a word. I just ran into his arms, burying my face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him. He was solid. He was real. He was alive. All the terror, all the paranoia of the past few days washed away in a flood of overwhelming relief. "I knew you could do it," he whispered into my hair. "I knew they underestimated you." He looked over my shoulder at our son. "Julian, you came." "Dad," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry. I should have believed her. I should have believed you." "There's no time for that," Richard said, his voice immediately shifting back to the focused, commanding tone of a CEO. "Marcus is making his move. The press conference is in less than 2 hours. What did you find?" Quickly, we laid out everything we had discovered. The insurance policy, the catastrophic failure of the Prometheus project, Marcus's plan to use Richard as a scapegoat. Richard listened, nodding grimly. "It's worse than I thought," he said. "He didn't just want the company. He wanted to destroy my legacy entirely." He explained how Marcus had orchestrated the accident, drugging him and hiring professionals to stage the scene, intending for Richard to disappear permanently. But Richard, always paranoid, always prepared, had a secret escape plan he had put in place years ago for just such a corporate betrayal. He had been on the run ever since, trying to contact me, trying to guide me without leading Marcus's men directly to him. "But it's over now," Julian said. "We'll walk into that press conference with you. It's his word against yours, and you're alive." "It's not that simple," Richard said, his face grim. "He's already laid the groundwork. He'll say, I'm an imposter. Or he'll claim I faked my own death to escape the Prometheus failure, and that I'm the one trying to frame him. He's a master at twisting the narrative. We need more than just my presence. We need irrefutable proof of his intent." He pointed to the hard drive Julian was now holding. "Everything is on there. The real Prometheus data, showing he pushed the project past its safety limits against my direct orders. His secret financial records showing the hole he was trying to cover. But it's triple encrypted. It would take my team a week to crack it." "We don't have a week," I said, the cold reality of our situation setting in. "We have 90 minutes. Julian looked at the hard drive, then at his father. "The encryption key. Where is it?" Richard sighed, a look of frustration on his face. "It's a 20-word passphrase, a line from a poem. I change it every month. The new one. I was scheduled to change it the day of the accident. I never got the chance. It's still in my office, in my desk." "The main office?" Julian asked, his face falling. "Dad, it's a fortress. Marcus will have security doubled. We can't get in there." "I can," I said quietly. Both men turned to look at me. "Eleanor, no," Richard said. "It's too dangerous." "They are looking for you," I said, my voice firm. "They are looking for a man who looks like Julian. They are not looking for a 70-year-old woman in a gardening coat. They see a grandmother. Harmless." I looked at my husband. "For 40 years, I have hosted every single company party and charity gala. I know the name of every security guard, the schedule of every cleaning crew, and the location of every side entrance. You built the company, Richard, but I helped build the family. Let me use that." The press conference was being held in the grand atrium of the Vance Industries building. The room was packed with journalists, television cameras, and anxious employees. On a large stage, a single podium stood in front of a massive screen bearing the company logo and the words, "A tribute to Richard Vance and a vision for the future." Marcus Thorne was backstage, looking cool and confident as he reviewed his notes. He was about to step out and deliver the performance of a lifetime. He would be the grieving friend, the steady hand, the reluctant hero, stepping up to save the company from the reckless vision of his dead partner. What he didn't know was that 2 floors above him, a woman he had dismissed as a hysterical widow was walking calmly through the executive suite. I had gotten in through a service entrance, greeting the morning janitor Maria by name and asking about her grandchildren. She had smiled and let me pass without a second thought. I walked into Richard's office. It was cold and sterile, his personal effects already boxed up by Marcus's assistants. I sat down at his desk. It was locked. But I knew where he kept the spare key taped to the underside of the top drawer, a habit he'd had for 40 years. I retrieved the small, silver key and unlocked it. Inside, under a false bottom I had watched him install myself, was a single, sealed envelope, the passphrase. My phone buzzed. It was Julian. "He's on stage, Mom. You have 5 minutes." I raced back to the service elevator, down to the lobby, and slipped out of the building into the waiting car where Julian and Richard were frantically working on the hard drive. I gave them the phrase. Julian's fingers flew across the keyboard. "I'm in," he said, a note of triumph in his voice. "Downloading the files now. Dad, the evidence here is damning. It's worse than we thought." On stage, Marcus was in his element. He was emotional, powerful. He painted a picture of Richard as a brilliant but flawed man, a gambler whose final bet had threatened to ruin them all. And it is with the heaviest of hearts, he said, his voice thick with false emotion, that I must now assume the full weight of leadership to guide us through this difficult time. It's now or never, Richard said from the car, his eyes burning with a cold fire. Julian and I walked into that press conference. We walked right down the center aisle as Marcus was taking his first question. A murmur went through the crowd. The cameras turned towards us. Marcus stopped, his confident smile faltering for the first time. "Eleanor? Julian?" he said, his voice tight. "What is the meaning of this? This is a private corporate event." "We're here to set the record straight, Marcus," Julian said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. He was holding a tablet. "You've been telling a very compelling story, but we have the real one." Marcus laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "My friends in the press?" he said, turning back to the cameras. "As you can see, the grief has been very hard on the Vance family. This is a private matter that we will deal with compassionately." "Will you deal with this compassionately?" I asked, my voice cutting through the room. It was the first time I had spoken. All eyes were on me. I looked at the giant screen behind Marcus. "Julian, now." On the massive screen, the corporate logo dissolved. It was replaced by a single, damning email. An email from Marcus to an offshore bank, outlining the plan to use the insurance money to cover the Prometheus losses. Then another document appeared. Richard's explicit written order to halt the project, an order Marcus had ignored. Then another and another. The real data, the secret accounts, the entire conspiracy laid bare for the world to see. Marcus stared at the screen, his face turning from a healthy tan to a sickly pale gray. He was speechless. The reporters were in a frenzy, shouting questions, their cameras flashing like a lightning storm. "You mourned my husband very convincingly, Marcus," I said, my voice cold and clear. "But you made one mistake. You forgot who you were dealing with, his wife." Marcus opened his mouth to speak, to deny, to lie one last time, but he never got the chance. The main doors to the atrium swung open, and Richard Vance, my husband, very much alive, walked into the room. He was flanked by 2 FBI agents. The room exploded into chaos. As the agents walked onto the stage to take a stunned, catatonic Marcus into custody, Richard came to my side. He took my hand, his grip strong and sure. The flashbulbs were blinding, the noise was deafening, but in that moment, all I could see was him. Later that day, after the storm had passed, Richard and Julian and I sat in the Vance Industries boardroom. "The board has held an emergency vote," Richard said, looking at me. "Marcus is out, and they've, created a new position, co-chair of the board. They feel the company could use a new perspective. Someone with a quiet strength, who sees the details everyone else misses." He smiled, that old, familiar smile. "It's yours, Eleanor, if you want it." I looked out the window at the city skyline, a city I had just raced through as a fugitive. I had been a wife, a mother, a grieving widow. I had been underestimated, dismissed, and hunted. And I had survived. I had fought back. I had won. "I accept," I said. And as I spoke the words, I knew that the quiet, grieving country I had been living in was gone. I was home.